everyone, and welcome to Lacework's Avoiding the Shared Irresponsibility Model. My name is Dan Hubbard. I'm the CEO of Lacework, and we're really excited to be part of the Pagerduty Summit. And we're going to talk about something that is near and dear to our heart as a cloud security vendor. So, assuming that you are operating in one of the big three public clouds, AWS, GCP, or Azure, you're probably intimately familiar with what's called the shared responsibility model. This essentially is the cloud provider, and this is Amazon's version of it. The cloud provider is responsible for security of the cloud, the hypervisor, the hardware, the network, the physical security, and the customer is responsible for security in the cloud, the customer data, the operating system, the networking, the configuration, identities, and so forth. And another way to think about it is, if you can configure it, you're responsible for it. And Gartner's got a pretty interesting kind of prediction here that by 2022, which is actually not that far away, at least 95% of all cloud security configurations or security failures will be the fault of the customer. And the reason for this is that there's actually a lot of things to configure that you're responsible for. So if we dive into that a little bit, there is literally thousands and tens of thousands of APIs, applications, and services that you have to configure and you're responsible for when you deploy inside the public cloud. So what looks like a relatively simple thing, like, the provider's, responsible for this, you're responsible for this above the line, that seems like relatively rudimentary, but really when you dive into it, it's actually very complex. And all of these things are programmable and can be, built with infrastructure as code. The cloud providers themselves on their own have as many as 5,000 to 7,000 APIs. That's just in the IaaS and the PaaS side. Then you think of things like the microservices, ecosystem, your front-end application tier, your middle tier, your back-end tier. Then you think about things like the cloud-native landscape. What containers are you running? What type of container orchestration system? How do you do CI/CD? How do you do events and alerts and monitoring? And then lastly, of course, all of the platform services that are coming out. And to me, it literally seems like not a couple weeks go by when there isn't some new three-letter acronym that's being invented by somebody, and it just pops up. Every single one of these has a configuration plane and has a potential threat and a risk to your company. You really got to start thinking about that. The problem is that a lot of people think about the responsibility model between them and their provider. What they don't think about is, what is the responsibility model within my company? And this is what we call the shared irresponsibility model. And unfortunately, what we see in a lot of companies is this going on, where DevOps is pointing at security and going, oh, that security, they're always slowing us down. They're trying to put change control windows in. They're trying to, slow us down with these big, burdensome, security processes. And the security people are going, oh, DevOps, man, they're moving so fast. They're just making us insecure. And our belief, in fact, we have a saying that you should be able to run with speed and safety. Our belief is you can actually do both. And you don't have to have irresponsibility within the company, but there are some really core tenets that you need to think about. Today I'm going to really talk about 4 of those focus areas. And then I'm going to give an example of how you can use the Lacework cloud security solution and the PagerDuty integration to help solve some of these issues. So the first one is, you have to focus on the architecture of your security and your infrastructure and your organizational awareness around this issue. And I'm going to dive into each one of these, of course. The second is, you need to know the causation of change and the correlation of change in the data. The third one is the tooling and tuning. What's the common tool sets that people are using? How do you tune those? How do you adapt with those over time? And then lastly is workflows and automation. Automation is a key theme that you're going to see in DevOps and a key theme in infrastructure and infrastructure in the cloud. And security, quite frankly, is quite far behind there. So the ability to merge and build common workflows and repeatability through automation is going to be really important. So architecture and organization. This is where I think we see the most problems when people migrate to the cloud. If they weren't born in the cloud, this is where we see issues. So the first thing you really got to ask yourself is our security architecture a peer to our modern cloud infrastructure? And is there technical alignment? Do they operate in a similar way? And, I've got in on the right-hand side, some vendors, what they're doing, and some people are trying to bring their cloud wash solutions into the cloud. And DevOps is like, hey, that's not purpose fit for what we're doing here. That, those mnemonics, the way it deploys, the way you manage it doesn't fit for what we're doing. So you have to have some level of technical peer alignment. If you're gonna protect the cloud, you should probably have a security product that's built in the cloud for the cloud. The other is that it's really important that you have organizational responsibility models built, and there is collaboration and communication and an agreement on things like triage. Who owns triaging an event? Who owns risk? When there's a breach, how do you get together? Who runs, the breach process? Who's responsible ultimately when there is a problem? And, things like finger pointing, misalignment, governance problems happen here. So these are really critical. The architecture and organizational aspects of the irresponsibility model are things that you should really start thinking about early if you're looking to move into the cloud. The second is tooling and tuning. And a lot of people spend a lot of time here, and often there's missteps. We've got an example, a good example of how to do it right with PagerDuty, but we see all kinds of problems here and people not meeting technically in the middle. So you really should have a shared tooling across teams. Now, that may not be the exact same tooling, but it should be coming from the same data plane. And what we see quite often is that, two different groups, DevOps and security, be working from two different data sources or two different data planes. You should have the same data plane. The team should be doing knowledge sharing. There should be things like stand-ups, whether they're daily, weekly, monthly, you decide on the cadence between your DevOps and security people. You should have an agreement on who's, tuning the performance when there is knowledge sharing and tool sharing. And lastly, you should have shared risk models. Both teams should understand the cause and the effect and the risk models across, security, DevOps, operations, and of course, security. The third is really understanding changes. And the public cloud and infrastructure as a service is so ephemeral that understanding things that change in real time is becoming really, really important. I remember in private data center, thinking about these, once a month we can make a change. We've got, a change control window at midnight on Sundays where we can do something. Well, that's just asinine now. You don't have that world. Everything has changed. Everything happens in near real time. So security has to keep up with that. But you also have to understand the risks associated with change. So you have to know, if I make one change, how is that going to affect our risk process over time? And then you have to know how to correlate these changes and risks in near real time. And, things like finding that needle in a haystack, understanding the signals to noise, knowing if a change to the infrastructure from dev can affect a breach or a threat in some capacity. Another thing I think is really important is when there's downtime, understanding if it was a security event or if it was a developer mistake or a problem with an application. So a lot of these things manifest itself into the shared responsibility model. And lastly, but certainly not least, but this is really the tail end and a little bit more on the maturity side, it's great to have workflows and automation, and agree on what that whole end-to-end process is from build time to deploy time, and then continuously looking at the infrastructure and the security posture is really important to get agreement on. So you need to know what are those workflows of push and build and run, but also what are your workflow when you are going to automate a response. And there's a lot of repeatable things that actually are automatable. And automate could be something as simple as, hey, create a ticket that both people look at, and then they co-work together in maybe a hangout or a room in some way and triage that. But also there's things that are repeated things that happen over time. For example, let's say a developer is turning off automatically multi-factor authentication on their account. Well, you could manually remediate that. You could create a ticket, someone could close it, or you could automate it, maybe through a serverless function or something that will just automatically turn it off. Maybe people are opening buckets without the right privileges, for storage. Well, you could automate response to that. So all of that is really important around common workflows, but also ways to automate repeatability, and then have an understanding of how do you learn as a team over time. And learning obviously is really critical here as you're moving throughout the process in your maturity life cycle. And these are things like auditing, pipelines are a real good way to look at it. Of course, triaging, and then continuous deploy is another way to think about it. So before I dive into kind of the PagerDuty and Lacework integration, of course, I have to give a little bit of a plug on Lacework itself. So Lacework, we are a cloud security platform. We like to secure all of your infrastructure in the cloud, and we span multiple categories from compliance to configuration, and then of course the build time and runtime and vulnerabilities, and we span many different markets. We've recently announced, a great partnership with PagerDuty, where we are sending alert data with a good amount of fidelity, and it's had amazing uptick within our customers. I think we have, within a short amount of time, something like 40% of all of our customers are already using the PagerDuty integration. So let's talk about how we can use some of these areas of focus and then put them into practice with a cloud security solution like Lacework, and of course, a great solution and service like PagerDuty. So the first is like, how do you get running? And getting up and running is really simple. We're both SaaS, delivered. The first thing you need to do is create an API key from PagerDuty. You literally just, that's really like 2 or 3 clicks within their UI. Then you copy and paste that API key directly within what we call a PagerDuty channel. Within the Lacework UI. This is the Lacework dashboard you're seeing here. Then you identify what type of alerts to send at the highest level. And then you understand, or from there, you have to understand what type of severity and alerts you want to send. And then obviously how you want to respond is all built into the PagerDuty side. And one of the real neat things that we have in our infrastructure is when we create an event that may turn into an alert, we have what's called the W5 and sometimes the how part of that. And that's just for every single event. And this spans not just your containers, your threats, your risks, your compliance, your Kubernetes, you name it, we do the W5. So the W5 is really the who, what, when, where, why, and the how of an alert or an event. So let me walk through why that's important and then how that fits into the PagerDuty story. And these are all screenshots from our UI. So the first one is, you really kind of need to know who do you send an alert to. And it's funny because it seems so rudimentary. Shouldn't you just send the alert to the person that's on, on call? But actually the answer may not be that, or maybe the person on call needs to escalate that. So in the modern cloud infrastructure, the first person, if there's a change that you want to alert or you want to know who to alert, is typically the IAM user. In this particular case, you've got an AWS user here called Michael with an AWS account and a principal ID, and a little bit of details about what happened. So who you send that or who you escalate to is critical. And the last thing you want to do is send an alert that says something like, oh, there's a big dangerous new thing out there, but you don't tell you what the cause and effect of it was. So who is important. The next one is, what is the severity of the alert and what are some of the details? So we'll give you a top level severity ranking, from, lowest or informational all the way through to high, and, wake the person up in the middle of the night because this is really bad. And then we tell you a little bit about what was the severity of the alert details. So in this particular case, we're telling you, hey, there's a medium alert. There was a new bucket that was created within AWS. This is the bucket name, and here's the value, and this is the API call that was used. The third thing is why. Why are you sending this PagerDuty alert? You hear this problem all the time, which is, I keep getting these alerts. Why am I getting all of these alerts from the security product? And eventually, if the signal to noise is too busy, they just turn it off, or they don't wake up at night, or their pager goes off and they don't care. So you really have to have a good focus of the fidelity of the alert, but also obviously the signal to noise ratio. And you need to be telling the responder why this alert is coming through. So in this particular case, we do our best of kind of giving you a natural language version of that. We don't deliver the CloudTrail, text, comma, delimited file. We don't give you a JSON, that you have to parse through. We tell you, for this account, on this user, this bucket was created by this user at this time, and the severity was medium because this hasn't happened before and we think this is a medium risk. And then where is really important. You know, maybe someone looks at an alert and goes, oh, that's actually really normal. You know, Mike always changes S3 buckets at this time. But when they put it all together and they go, oh, wait a minute, why would Mike be doing this in the US East region? And Mike, it doesn't work out of Redmond, Washington. So why is actually that actual change coming from there? Or, whoa, Mike is actually on vacation right now. He told me he's going to be offline for a week. We're getting an alert that says he just made a change and it's coming from an area that he actually doesn't even live in or ever do DevOps from. So this is actually another signal that you know something potentially bad is happening. And this isn't just where as in where the user is or the developer, but it also could be where as in where's the region or where is the workload or where's the account that created it. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, once you get the signal down, you've got the right amount of information, you got the right type of fidelity, you need to guide the responder through how they remediate. And maybe you can automate this over time because you can use our API. Our API is an easy way to get event data and to create an automated response through JSON and maybe through some parsing or through another set of capabilities. But we also give you detailed information in our dashboard, and this can also be delivered to PagerDuty or within the alerts that you saw earlier. You click on it and you'll come back to the dashboard and you'll look through the alert. So in this particular case, if you just saw, hey, it was an S3 bucket, it was done by Mike, you're like, oh, you know what, I don't know, what more do I need to know? You could see, okay, what was the access key? What was the ARN? What's the principal ID? What are some other information? What's the auth header that was created? You know, what was the actual CloudTrail bucket? You know, was this our web server or was this like confidential data? You can see here, we'll tell you if that user had multi-factor authentication on. We'll tell you the source IP of the user, what the API was that was used to create this. So we give you as much information to allow you to respond. And that response could be as simple as logging into your cloud dashboard to remediate it, or it could be as complex as running a serverless function or running something like chat ops that maybe goes from PagerDuty to Slack, from Slack to Jira, Jira back to Slack, and Slack back to close the ticket or close the event within PagerDuty. So depending on the maturity level of where you are, there's all kinds of different ways to remediate that actual response itself. So how this looks in PagerDuty, obviously it depends on how you configure it, but this is a couple screenshots of different types of alerts. So the left-hand side is, of course, the PagerDuty dashboard. You can see here's a triggered alert that was triggered from Lacework. We automatically set the urgency, but you can, of course, change that. We give you the title, which essentially is the what of the title. You can assign who that user is via the telemetry within the title and maybe the JSON. And then, of course, you can triage that within PagerDuty or whatever other system you have. On the right-hand side, we have an example of what the actual email or the page that would go to, the text in most cases, that would go to the responder. So we try and give you enough information so you can look at it and go, oh, this is something, I need to take a look at right now, or maybe it's something I can get to in the morning and I can, set the PagerDuty urgency down until then, or this is something that I can fork off to somebody else that we can take and throw into our queue for later in the week to handle, or I could reassign it, obviously, within PagerDuty. So it's a really great way to take a lot of the information we're collecting, a lot of the intelligence and the data and the efficacy that we had, and then deliver that directly to PagerDuty to make sure that the right person is getting the right data and the right amount of information to close or triage the ticket directly from there, or the event from there. So that's all I've got for today. I'd like to, of course, thank you to PagerDuty for inviting us to the summit. Really excited about the virtual summits. And I'm happy to, we've got some time to take some questions. So I'm happy to now take your questions. And I look forward to hopefully getting back to PagerDuty Summit maybe next year in person. So thank you very much.